Welcome, people. Welcome. Once again, this is the Bear Reaction Show. And we have a nice eye opener. Like a lot of people didn't know that this was going on in the 80s. But I do. 80 do. Ain't you that commercial? 80 do. But it was a government entity. It wasn't a government because all the assignments that they was doing, they didn't put it on the paperwork. But they were doing an experiment on the youth in the 80s. And when they came up with the Youth Authority. Unfortunately, I was blessed not to go, but I had my homeboy Dante, Floyd, Akili, Smurf. I don't think Stanley went. You have Showtime. They twins, Sean and Shannon. They grew up in my area, but they went to this youth authority at a youth, and that's where they was putting the boys at. So we're gonna get into the experiment that they was experimenting on us in the 80s, and you wonder why we the way we are. So let's get into it right quick. Let's see what I have for you guys. Get it in here real quick, like. Okay, here we go, y'all.
In California, there was a time when the system meant to guide troubled kids ended up becoming one of the most feared institutions in the state. It was called the California Youth Authority, often shortened to CYA, or even just YA. And for decades, it operated mostly out of public view, while thousands of young people passed through its gates. The system actually began earlier under a slightly different name, created in the early 1940s, before becoming what people knew as the California Youth Authority, just a couple years later. From the start, the idea behind YA sounded right: rehabilitation.
What I trip on is I look at other states, and if the experiment work in other states, then they implement it in another state. So they said it started in the 40s, but it didn't spread it didn't come to California until the 80s.
Structure and second chances for young people who had made mistakes and needed direction. On paper, Youth Authority was supposed to help, and for a growing state dealing with youth crime, it looked like a solution that balanced accountability with opportunity. But inside those walls, especially from the 1960s through the early 2000s, what played out over time became far more complicated, and for many, far more damaging than anyone expected.
Modern day slavery on our youth. That's what the Youth Authority was. Huh? It's to treat the kids like they treat the adults with a minimum of supervision.
Facilities across California, including those connected to Los Angeles County intake and processing, became known not for transformation, but for survival. Overcrowding became a serious issue, and when too many youths were placed into already strained environments, the pressure built quickly and didn't ease easily. Many of the teenagers sent into YA over the decades came from unstable backgrounds, and while some were involved in serious crimes, others entered the system at different levels depending on the era and policies at the time.
I'm in the 4th grade, and I stayed on 109 in Compton Avenue. My homeboy, I ain't gonna give his name, he stayed on 108 in Compton Avenue. They call it Section 8. And we was in the 4th grade, and he got caught with shotguns and stuff, and he went to the Youth Authority.
Years went on, especially into the later period, the system shifted toward housing more serious offenders, but the mix of backgrounds and needs still created tension that wasn't always managed well. Inside, the environment could change fast, and the difference between a calm day and a chaotic one
It do not
could
look
come
like that
down to
now.
a single incident or conflict. Fights happened, group tensions built up, And for many youths, daily life became about staying alert and avoiding situations that could turn dangerous without warning. Staff were expected to control these environments, but reports over the years suggested that the methods used often leaned more toward control than guidance. Physical force, intimidation, and strict discipline showed up in multiple accounts. And while not every staff member operated that way, the overall culture allowed those approaches to exist for long stretches of time. Isolation became one of the most criticized parts of the system. Youths were sometimes placed in solitary units for extended periods, whether for serious behavior issues or as a way to manage crowded facilities. And being cut off like that at a young age left lasting effects on many who went through it. Education in the California Youth Authority was supposed to be a core part of rehabilitation, but the reality didn't always match that goal. Some facilities struggled to provide consistent schooling, and in certain cases, youths left further behind academically than when they entered, which made re-entry into society even harder. Mental health support also showed the limits of the system. Many youths came in already dealing with trauma, but the scale of the system and lack of consistent resources meant that not everyone received the level of care they needed. In some cases, behaviors tied to trauma were treated as discipline problems instead of something that needed support. By the 1980s and 1990s, criticism of YA was growing louder and harder to ignore. Families, advocates, and even some former staff began speaking out about what they had seen inside. Yes. And the public image of the California Youth Authority started to shift in a serious way. Reports described a system that wasn't consistently reducing crime long term, and in some cases was making things worse. Right. Young people were leaving with a deeper exposure to violence, stronger connections to criminal environments, and fewer tools to actually rebuild their lives. In Los Angeles and across California, the reputation changed. Youth Authority was no longer seen as a second chance. It became known as a place people feared ending up, even for those who went in for lower-level issues during earlier years. Legal pressure followed that shift. In the early 2000s, lawsuits were filed against the state focusing on conditions inside Youth Authority facilities.
See, what the Youth Authority was was developed to condition them for the penitentiary, like to get them ready. It wasn't created to prevent them to go to the penitentiary. It was created to get them immune to the environment of the penitentiary.
Raising concerns about safety, abuse, lack of proper medical and mental health care, and failure to provide real rehabilitation. These cases had actually been building for years before reaching a breaking point that forced the state to respond publicly. Investigations connected to those lawsuits uncovered serious systemic problems: staffing shortages, inconsistent training, poor conditions, and a structure that relied heavily on containment instead of growth. One of the biggest turning points came in November 2004, when a major legal action led to a consent decree that forced the state to begin real reforms. This wasn't optional anymore. It came with oversight, timelines, and pressure to fix a system that had been operating the same way for decades. Reforms focused on reducing violence, improving living conditions, and expanding access to education and mental health services. Oversight teams monitored progress closely, and for the first time in a long time, there was consistent attention on what daily life inside Youth Authority actually looked like. Even with those changes, progress didn't happen overnight. Changing policy is one thing, but changing culture inside facilities built over decades is something else entirely. Some improvements showed up, but reports continued to surface about ongoing issues, showing that real change takes time and accountability working together. Around that same period, a larger shift started happening in how California approached youth justice. Instead of relying heavily on large state-run institutions like the California Youth Authority, there was growing support for keeping youths closer to their home communities. Smaller county-based programs started gaining attention as a better option for rehabilitation, offering more direct support and involvement from families. In 2005, the California Youth Authority was officially reorganized and became known as the Division of Juvenile Justice. That change marked a shift in direction, but it didn't instantly erase the history or the challenges inside the system.
See, that's what they have on paper, but that's not what they're doing. And if y'all want to know why the youth to this day, if you want to know why they act the way they act, because the experiments that was going on inside, huh? The magnetic sound waves that was going on inside, behavior health that they would say. So if you can see, they was actually writing something down, but doing something different, huh? It was writing it down like they was taking care of business, but in the backyard, in the back door, they was tearing these children up, kids up. And I didn't know. I just know that they was coming home rough. They was coming home tougher than what they went in. So this is the reason, one of the reasons why the youth is the way they are is because of these YAs. I thank y'all for coming to another Bear Reaction. And we're going to get it in, y'all, to our next episode.